Thank you. Warm welcome. Let me first introduce a bit of the context. AdLittle, as a strategy advisory, we are supporting multiple customers on their mobile private network strategy, and that is both true for operators as well as for industrial players. We've done more than 24 projects in this space, reviewed more than 50 RFPs and offers, and analyzed accordingly. What you find here is the learning from all of that, and some of the conclusions thinking forward. My name is Bela Virag. I'm managing partner of AdLittle in Austria. I lead the B2B capability of AdLittle globally. I was the lead author of our campus networking viewpoint 3 years ago and run the topic ever since. First, let's put this into context. We believe that mobile private networks are only one part of this equation. You've got to think of an MPN, you've got to think of slicing, you've got to think of edge. All three services, and then potentially even neutral host and a few more that we can talk about, are relevant in this context. If you only look at it from an MPN point of view, it's probably slightly narrow. And the reason is on this complicated chart. And that's a chart that some of you may have seen in the past, and I'll walk you through it briefly. Because in essence, what we're saying is a CIO of an enterprise has use cases on the outside that they will look upon. They need to be inside a security perimeter, so security goes here, and then you have the use cases, right? These use cases all happen in various domains. So you got the office, the business premise, the production, the fleet, whatever. These domains may be different by company. And then you have the red line. And the red line is the line that typically telcos find hard to cross. Everything that telcos do currently, traditionally, is inside the red line, usually. Which is your fiber, your wireless, your cellular, your LoRa, all of that stuff, and then your backhaul, your SD-WAN, your cloud, your red, and the other compute. That's in the very center. Now, inside the red line, the value that you make to your customer is a cost-down business case. You're basically approaching a customer saying, I can do the same thing cheaper, or I can do more for less money, right? It's a cost-down business case. And outside the red line is where we have the value-up business cases. And that's a really important thought. So the question is, how can I, as an operator, step across this line into the value-up discussions? Because if we reduce downtimes of my factory, or we reduce maintenance, or we improve productivity, or material efficiency, or whatever it is, that's the business case of customers, right? Now, interestingly enough, out here is where you have your MPN, your slicing, and your edge, and all that sort of stuff. So for the first time with an MPN, we have a credible opportunity to step outside the red line. And I think that's the way we need to look at it, because then we have the relevant discussions about actual business cases, which previously we didn't have. Now, it's different people to talk to, of course. Inside the red line, it's the CIO. Outside the red line, it's the business units, right? But so that's the first important thought I wanted to leave with you today. It's important. Now, a mobile private network adds a cellular technology to a local area network. That wasn't there before, right? I know we all are very familiar with how it is, but conceptually it's important to recognize it's in the LAN, it's not in the WAN. It's incremental, not substitutional, right? It's a new domain. It's a domain that's controlled by the customer because it's his local area. It's behind his firewall and his IP address range, not in ours, right? It's his network. He determines when we do the firmware update or when we do whatever we do with the networks. And it hasn't been there before, so it's a new building block, incremental to Wi-Fi and wireline alternatives. Now, like 80% of all cases that we've come across, and we are aware of a few hundred mobile MPN deployments around the world, all of them start with Wi-Fi, right? Like 80% of them start with Wi-Fi. Customer wanting more coverage outside on the parking lot or in the outdoor areas. Their old Wi-Fi has gotten too old, needs to be replaced, right? And then maybe they stumble across the whole idea that there's cellular, and cellular ticks a lot of the boxes. Not all, right? So device ubiquity is clearly a box over here, right? Not all, but cellular does answer a lot of the boxes, frankly, that are relevant. So we need a value proposition because, frankly, when you think of the 3GPP ecosystem, the cellular ecosystem, it doesn't overlap with the IEEE ecosystem, right? The vendors are different vendors. The distributors are different distributors. The people within the customer organization are different, right? They're two separate ecosystems, right? So if 80% of the MPNs start in Wi-Fi, how do we get there, right? Don't we need to have an MPN proposition that's sort of sellable by Wi-Fi channels, right? Shouldn't we somehow have a sensor that tells us when the customer is thinking about Wi-Fi? Because otherwise we wouldn't even notice, right? So that's, I think, an important one, and we'll carry it to the... Now, there's a myth. The myth is Wi-Fi is always cheaper. That's actually incorrect, right? We've come across a number of cases. Like I said, we've analyzed a few dozen of them. There's a mining case where we prove the point that it's 70% cheaper to go with a mobile private network. There's a warehousing case where we proved the point it was 38% cheaper. This is based on real numbers, on actual tenders that we evaluated. There is a heavy data case where it's the other way around. The mobile private network would have been more expensive than the Wi-Fi, right? But the basic assumption that Wi-Fi is cheaper is inaccurate. It depends is the real answer. And it depends, at the end of the day, how big's the area, right? What throughput do I need? And which of these other qualities do I need in device density, in reach, in handover, in criticality, and so on, right? So, important to remember, Wi-Fi is not always cheaper. It's in a TCO view. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. We segmented the market into 4 buyer groups. On a 2x2, you know, consultants love 2x2s. That's what we do. And on this 2x2, we have a horizontal saying there's end-to-end service capability, low and high, and there's technical capability, low and high, right? And we learned that there's in that there's 4, right? So you have engineering-focused customers who expect you to engineer a solution to their specifications. That's where, like, most telcos are today, right? That's where you work with your customers through your POCs, and all that is great. Then you have the risk-conscious ones. That's the railway organizations who like to model risk and liability. You have the convenience-oriented ones. They are we call them the JFDI, you know what JFDI is, right? And then you have the cost-conscious. Now, for operators, 3 of the 4 are playing fields. The 4th one is really for equipment vendors. That's where customers buy the stuff themselves, right? Directly from the vendor. The values that you see, the gray box is the share of networks in 2030. The purple box is the addressable revenue out of the whole pool, right? The light blue is the profit margin, and the darker blue is the operator share, okay? And we've done this analysis for something like 20 markets or so by now. This is just pulling it across these markets. Obviously, figures can look different by market. But we expect that the majority of networks are going to be in the convenience-oriented space, and we expect that that's the place where operators can actually capture the larger share. Still, presently, you work up here. So the fundamental question is, how do we get down there? Right? How do we get into the volume? All right, let's look at what we do today, okay? And today, customers, when they think about mobile private networks, at least the ones that most operators come across, they will think about robotics, predictive maintenance, inline monitoring and quality control, or industrial VR and AR in all shapes and forms, and maybe a few more. We've gone through something like 400 use cases on this, but at the end, these are the ones that sort of pull most of the MPN discussion. And I brought you a little video I'll show in a second about this. But most of the MPN POCs live here in the monitoring and control, maybe basic process monitoring, maybe some actual physical production process control. So we call this the OT world, right? There's an IT world on top. That's the natural domain of Wi-Fi. MPNs are also possible here. But most of the POCs are not there. Most of the POCs are down here, right? And that's why it's engineering, that's why it's the top left. So the other question is, shouldn't we go up here? Because then we come to the bottom right, which is where we want to go, which is where the volume is and the money is. So I want to show you a little video. Oh, that one didn't play. If it plays, it's great. If it doesn't, then can we make this play? Cannot. Okay. I was going to show you a video about a facility that is operating a warehouse. It's a fully automated warehouse with about 1,000 robots whizzing about the warehouse floor on rails. I'm picking out grocery produce. It's a warehouse that's over in the UK. I'm deployed by a company called Ocado. It works off a single sector. Now imagine that you have 1,000 devices logged into a single sector, right? That's a problem. Imagine you have 1,000 devices logged into a single access point. That's impossible, right? So that's why the number of devices also matters. And there's a few other examples in there, but this particular logistics example actually takes out 70% of the logistics costs of a warehouse, because you don't have people in the warehouse, right? You just have robots whizzing about and picking out stuff and bringing the finished picked boxes up front. Great case. There's a 3D version of this where the robots actually don't only go on rails, but they also climb up racks, right? Packing density, and the height that they climb is like 15 meters. It's incredible. Obviously gives you a lot more packing density. And then there's the Chinese version where they will move the entire racks around. Anyway, I'm sorry that it didn't work. Whatever. Second segment, I said we got to get down here because here we have 87% value capture. Here we have only 45, right? So this is where we got to go. And the way to think about this segment is it's got to be cash and carry. So any operator will want their sales channel, whether direct or indirect, to have in the account manager's backpack when they go see the customer a SIM card, a piece of fiber, and an MPN. Right? Now, do the number, if you're an operator, do the number, how many account managers do you have? Each account manager sells an MPN a month, okay? That's what we're after, right? How can we get to volume? How can we make a mobile private network an order form product? How can we get a mobile private network into a 5-digit total cost of ownership, right? To make it a cash and carry feel and experience for business customers. That's the question that we need to answer here, and the approach is a little similar to this. The second video works great. So this is an advertising video from a company called AdLittle. I'm sure some of you may have heard of them. It's actually a few years old. And they ship a radio head. They ship what they call the AdLittle Edge Gateway and the SIM cards. The radio head is in the area between 3 and 5K for 2 times 20 watt output power. And the little black box that you saw on the bottom, that's a device that is an edge gateway. That edge gateway will be around $1,000, right? That box. And you ship it, it's plugged in. Obviously, this is a demo case. But I have seen it being put up in 30 minutes. This box, the moment you connect it to the internet and power it on, it will call home. And it will call home to the core platforms and obviously the configuration. And the configuration in this particular case is hosted on Amazon Web Services. It's called Bubble Cloud, a service that anyone can book. And yeah, you put in the SIM card in the phone and boom, you've got your mobile network. Okay, that's cash and carry. Now, many IT guys know how many access points they need to have a certain place lit, right? Well, what if we give them a ratio and you say Wi-Fi access points divided by 5 is the number of microdots that you'll need, right? That would be interesting. If we look at it this way, then this can become cash and carry because, you know, I think we can engineer our processes in a way that we can get all of the radio engineering complexity out as we have it today. So, to do so, we will no longer be in the position to discuss robotics and warehouse optimization. Imagine those 1,000 robots that whiz about rails, right? That requires somebody who has a warehouse to go and rebuild it, right? You don't do that overnight. That's a long process. These things, they, you know, the moment you change infrastructure or you change processes of an organization, it's a lengthy decision. And you have POCs and all this stuff. That's all on the top left, right? If we want to get to the bottom right, it's got to be different types of use cases. And it's got to be broadly appealing use cases. There's 2 types. One type is use cases with like PBX replacement, DECT replacement, Wi-Fi backhauling, simple broadband coverage, right? These use cases everybody has. If you think of a PBX or DECT replacement, that basically means that you put a pizza box into your customer's premise. On the pizza box, you'll have your virtual EPC, you'll have your virtual IMS, ba-boom. Customer set with his dialing, and even if the network to the outside, you have a whiteout or you have a blackout, right? Internal, you can still make your phone calls. You still have voice. If you have a solution that feels like private teams, right? You can put that on that box. I don't know if private teams exist. I haven't figured it out with Microsoft yet. But in theory, all of that experience you can put onto that edge compute, if you like, right? Because it's sitting there. Now, that's all of a sudden not a few anymore, that's a lot. The other approach is we go to widely known industry use cases in well-understood locations. And the word that is important in that sentence is locations, because locations are similar in the way that they work. That can be stadiums, harbors, logistics halls, or security places within factories that need video-enabled gates and so on, right? And you can see the difference in order of magnitude, right? You may have thousands of these, right? But you probably have tens of thousands of those, right? So but still, it's at least thousands, it's not dozens anymore. All right, so the objective must be to place both an MPN and MEC there, and the MEC then will host all the applications that you would want to offer to the customer. This is your Trojan horse, and you can add incremental services onto that MEC as you go along and improve the relevancy that you have to your customer. I think if we broaden the scope of an MPN in the way that I suggested, we need to evolve our thinking about in-house coverage solutions. Because today, when we think about an MPN, we think about it as a standalone service. And actually, we believe that's suboptimal, right? We should think about it broader, and our portfolio is really an in-house coverage. So it goes from in-house coverage solution portfolio to an in-house networking and apps portfolio. It's an evolution of the way you think about the portfolio. And that needs to have the in-house coverage solution, which is going to broadcast both the public cellular signal as well as the private cellular signal. So all your in-house coverage solutions, which presently are cost, can then be reused twice. Your neutral host, potentially in public spaces, right? Your guest Wi-Fi, potentially, if that is needed. But then also your private, and that can be your Wi-Fi, potentially with an MPN backhaul, or it could be your MPN in both 4G and 5G. And then we go with our broad appeal use case we talked about, and we add OT on top. So we actually do the reverse. We don't start with the OT stuff. We start with the broad appeal stuff, and we add the complex stuff later. Makes a lot more sense, right? Gets you a lot further. Now that means that we recommend our customers to think about two value propositions. There's one value proposition that we call design to requirement, and there's another one that we call design to scale, right? The design to requirement go after the top two boxes, and the design to scale goes after the bottom right box. And they're very different. The key difference here is this one, design to scale, needs to be also enabled for indirect channels. Then I think it can scale. It can scale, and obviously it needs to be at the TCO point that I mentioned earlier in the 5-digit area rather than 6 digits or even 7 digits up. And it's a product sale from by experience. So really, my pitch today is if you think about an MPN and you are doing the POCs, that's great. Do your POCs, learn from that. If you don't have a strategy of how you can get into volume, stop the POCs. You will be losing money, right? Because complexity will eat it. If you do 10 POCs, that's great. You cannot do 100, right? Because your CTO at one point will say, you know what, I have a big network to take care of. I cannot take care of only the small places. So think about how we can get to thousands or potentially tens of thousands of MPNs out there, because that's where the business case is. And if you stay only with dozens, it's not profitable, and it's better to get out, quite frankly. But if you do stay in, then there's a good opportunity for you to place an edge and then add incremental services, including the OT, and have relevant discussions outside the red line with your clients. With that, I'd like to close. Thank you very much. I hope there were some good insights in here. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Bela. I think this was some great consulting. And maybe you have planted a couple of seeds in one head or the other in terms of business cases. Are there any questions in reaction to that? So
all clear?
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious about the frequency bands you are planning to use for the mobile private networks.
It goes across bands.
Yeah.
They're obviously in the 4G bands, but they move all the way to the 3.5. We've discussed with some that go to 26. We see 26 to become a bit more relevant for the industrial when it comes to positioning, because you can do more precise positioning. Most of the use cases that we presently see are up to 3.5, including CBRS in the US and so on.
Okay. Is there any regulation from the authorities planned on these private networks? So I imagine if you have thousands of them, then the landscape in RF is quite crowded.
So, first of all, obviously, I don't work for an authority. I don't know what they plan. The authorities that we do know of, they're actually thinking of awarding industrial spectrum, right, for regionally confined places. The best example of that, next to Germany, of course, is in the US with their CBRS, where they offer you an online ability to register a certain spectrum that you need for your location, and it's then, you geomark where you want it, and you get approval for that spectrum. There's something else that's interesting, though. What we learned is when we ran tenders even in closed markets, so markets without industrial spectrum, right, where spectrum is allocated only to a few players. We invited lots of companies. We got, in this particular case, 18 replies back. It was a case that demanded integration with spectrum. So how did 18 companies find spectrum? Right? And to me, it says spectrum is not a strategic hurdle for MPNs. It's more a sourcing question, right? Because these companies obviously walked over to the number 2, 3, 4 player in the country and said, would you mind to, because they don't need it. And the funny thing is, in one case, this was for a paper factory. It's published, so I can talk about it. This was a paper factory. On the factory floor, the incumbent had a tower broadcasting the public signal, right? Incumbent offered a slice on that, was disqualified because the customer didn't want a slice. Customer wanted his network. Right? So even if you have spectrum and site, it doesn't, you still need to listen to the client, of course. But spectrum is a sourcing problem more than, it seems, more than it is a barrier.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, but I think your answer already implied it, that at least in Germany, the authorities gave away the spectrum for private networks at very cheap conditions in order to support this industry. Bela, thank you very much.
Thank you.